Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that you had a fantastic lunch break and you are energized, well-nourished, and ready for an exciting afternoon period. Thank you for those who came back on time. I applaud you for your diligence in following directions. Thank you very much. And I would like to see that again tomorrow, okay? Thank you. Okay, so Davina is running a bit behind, so I'm taking over control just for a little bit and going to go ahead in the interest of us being able to finish on time because we have a lot packed into this afternoon. So we're going to move into our afternoon panel. So our moderator for the afternoon panel is Ms. Anna Kutta Patel. She is the Washington, D.C. liaison for the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, bringing 25 years of experience in international peace building, gender empowerment, and human rights to this new role. Okay, she said wrap it up. Okay, I can do that. She's an all-round awesome person. And was so gracious in agreeing to moderate this panel that we will be having this afternoon. The panel is titled Tech Facilitated Service Provision, Emerging Practices. And with her, joining her on stage would be Dr. Brooke Bello from Water Life, Rochelle Keehan from Collective Liberty, Cheryl Pereira of One Child, and Rashan Abbas of the Campaign for Uyghurs. So we invite the panel to join us on stage.
I'm going to move this up a little bit so we're a little more, so I can see you. Where's Brooke? Here she is. And can I call you Brooke?
Brooke or Brookie or Parker.
Okay. Hello, hello. Too loud, too. I know it's after lunch, so what I'm going to ask you to do is everybody to stand up for a minute. All right, and I want to take your left hand and shake it, and your right hand and shake it, and your left foot and shake it, and your right foot and shake it, and then all of it. Give me a turnaround. A little bit more awake, yeah? Yeah. Great. This is way too extraordinary a panel for you to be asleep, and I am incredibly honored to moderate it, particularly as someone who doesn't have the kind of experience and history as almost all of you in this room do with this subject matter. So thank you so much for having me. I'm pleased to be here from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN. And before I get to that, I just want to say two really brief things about what the UN has to offer in this area. And the first is the UN Trust Fund for Contemporary Forms of Slavery. And to know that that is funding and that you guys are all, most of you who are in service provision kinds of organizations should take advantage of that. Unfortunately, the window just closed for this year. But just to give a sense, in 2024, the fund supported over 10,000 survivors through 45 grants in 35 countries for a total of 1.4 million USD in grants annually. I know it's not a huge amount of money. These are smaller grants, but there is a lot of support that comes with that as well. And so please take a look at that. If you just Google UN Trust Fund on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, you will find that on the OHCHR website. The other is, as many of you know, there is a UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery. Currently in that mandate is Tomoyo Obokata. He's based in London. I hope that he will participate. It may be in the World meeting next year, if not some of the forums. And his most recent report in July of 2023 focused on the significant role of technology in both facilitating and preventing contemporary forms of slavery. So again, a resource for you all from the UN. Those kinds of reports, the way they're done is 80% it's civil society from around the world who offer inputs into this kind of reporting for the special rapporteur. So it's very closely done with that, as well as with the UN's BTEC project. So within UN Human Rights, the part that focuses on technology and AI and how it intersects with human rights is called the BTEC project. I'm sure Some of you, or at least one of us who is coming from the tech companies, knows about that. And that works with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to look at the governance and the risks and building an infrastructure around AI and for the protection of human rights. So those are three just quick things that I hope you all are aware of that the UN offers in this area. And now we turn to the more important part of this, which is our panelists. This is an extraordinary group of women and three founders, all CEOs, coming from different parts of the ecosystem around anti-trafficking, and all with different approaches to technology. And we're structuring this around sort of 3 rounds of questions, hopefully some time for Q&A, but I want to get right to our experts here. So, Dr. Brooke Bello. Brooke, the first set of questions is really about, why are you here? Tell us a little bit about your organization and what is your motivation to be here and on the panel? What is the problem that you are trying to solve?
Okay, was that like 3 questions? No, it's okay. Thank you, Anna. Well, just so you know, that was not my logo. So I saw someone take a photo. That was another More to Life. It's a mentoring program. I think they're going to change that, so make a note of that. Ours is More to Life, living above the noise, just FYI. I'm here because, I mean, I'm 20 years into the anti-trafficking movement this year, and I think the work that Free the Slaves is doing, it's always incredible to be a part of a community. There's been schisms and challenges within the community of the anti-trafficking world for many years, but there have been a lot of great things, and we all pretty much know that. And I think we've come a long way. I think as a founder of a nonprofit that has, and I use the term rescued lightly. Rescue means many different things. But provide services for, sometimes rescue, transformative services, support for about 12,000 victims in that 20 years and tons of other individuals globally. I'm here because I really love technology, and I love its solvent to what's going to be taking place in the movement as we move forward. And I really hope to galvanize the troops within the anti-trafficking movement to understand where it can go. I also am excited about the narrative that Free the Slaves is working on and being a part of a consortium of individuals that can help to put that together in a beautiful way. And I also want to shine the light also of how we judge or prejudge individuals. There is sometimes, as Tanya Gould said this morning, this little, in closing, this little stigma of being whoever you are, whether you're a Black woman or whoever you are, and being a survivor, me, of child trafficking. And I think that when you go to provide information, when you go to raise funds, it always takes persons of color a little bit longer, and you have to go a couple clicks down deeper and work harder to raise, you know, the few $1 million that we have to raise, and even more now. And I want to change that trajectory for everyone. Finally, I also want to be able to have people to understand the work of prevention in the space and technology and the use of prevention and the work toward men and the legacy of fatherhood. And I'm here because I live in Florida, so it's close. And I'm just really happy to be here. I don't want to take up too much time in the beginning, so.
Brooke, I think we all could listen to you for a long time, and I'm so glad that you started us out, because this session really is supposed to be looking at positive, like how is technology being used to fulfill the missions of organizations and entities in this space, and you have been very good about giving us more things in that column on the positive side, because I will say, as Rose said this morning, I think I come from the fear side. I see this potentially as the end of the world. And so it's funny that I'm moderating this panel, but I'm really pleased to hear the positive developments. I'm grateful to you all for bringing that, and thank you for getting us started there. So Rochelle, joining us from Collective Liberty and also from DC, where I am now very recently based, tell us a little bit about why you are here.
I love all the work that Free the Slaves does, so I was excited to finally be able to be collaborating with this group of people. And I'm actually really passionate, and like you'll just, if you ever see me in conferences, I'm always just evangelizing the local approach. I think that when We just had the TVPA. Not a single one of the 50 states or territories had their own trafficking law. Federal was the only approach, right? And in the last 24 years, it's become such like a robust movement. And not only every state has their own law and they're starting to have their own task forces, but counties and cities are as well. And if we're just obsessed with the feds, like you're just missing this like army of people that could be doing a lot. So I'm just constantly chanting about that. So our work is making sure that they have the resources that they need. I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia and I became a DA the same year our state law passed. And surprise, my whole special victims unit was like, well, we don't have trafficking, so drop it, Rochelle. I'm like, cool, well, I'm the special domestic violence prosecutor and I feel like I'm seeing like 3 to 10 per week in my caseload. So like we have trafficking. But the way our legal system works is whoever tries the first case potentially like ruins the interpretation of the law for everyone in your entire appellate district and everyone's chicken, right? So I'm not gonna, I don't know who's watching on the stream, so if you wanna talk to me later about how I just tried the cases anyway, someone has to do it. And in doing that, I realized, wow, not only do we at each local level, at the time, Philly was the 6th biggest city in the country and we had no technical resources. I would have to wait 6 months for the federal task force to maybe review my phone for me. Things are a little bit better in big cities now, but small cities are still facing that same situation. They do not have what they need. And we're all running around being like, F the police, like F the prosecutors, everyone sucks. And maybe it's true, but also like, even if they wanted to, many of them just can't. So what can we do about that? So all of my work is like all the excuses that exist, trying to find the solutions, right? And give them what they need to get it done. And we on our team, it's all current and former law enforcement and prosecutors. We have a lot of survivor leader consulting and advising to make sure it's all, making sure that it's trauma informed, just helping them get it done. So we sometimes build the intel for them. And the main goal is please stop arresting potential victims of sex and labor trafficking, build stronger cases so that you can prosecute the traffickers successfully, and stop making your whole case rest on the shoulder of a victim cooperating. Build it so that maybe they don't have to. So really hope-based. I'm focused on cops, but they're not my goal. So don't feel like I'm like in that bucket. I'm just trying to do reforming as much as I can.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Yes, thank you so much. That was great. And again, a different part of the ecosystem here, which I think is really interesting that this forum brings together. So Rushan comes to us from the Campaign of Uyghurs, perhaps the most important voice for human rights for Uyghurs in the United States. Tell us a little bit about why you're here.
Thank you so much, Anna. Can I just ask a quick question? How many in the room, how many of you know what is happening to Uyghur people today in detail? Not just that you heard something, but can you raise your hand if you know in extension, thank you, just very few, I guess. Thank you, Bikan, for having me here. Just 5 years ago, I was a devoted mother with a successful business career, working as an international business development director in Washington, D.C., when the Chinese government implemented full-fledged genocide against my people, with concentration camps being filled, millions of people being disappeared, and every house was put QR code on every homes, and the iris scanning on every checkpoints under like 100 yards from each other, GPS tracking devices on every vehicles. And they were using the pretext of fighting the extremism and the radicalized Muslim people. When they say the Uyghurs are radicalized, they're talking about Uyghurs who may have been just fasting during Ramadan, like I am fasting today. Today is second day of Ramadan, or just praying, or refusing to marry Han Chinese men. The Uyghur girls are forced to marry Han Chinese men, while the Chinese government is giving them money, housing, and jobs to come and marry Uyghurs. If she says no for such a forced marriage, herself, her siblings, her parents will send to the concentration camps in the name of Islamic extremists, did not want to marry non-Muslim Han Chinese. And also the Chinese state media itself reported 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres, mostly male, deployed into Uyghur homes, live inside with the Uyghur families while monitoring and supervising their daily lives. This is not something I'm talking about as an Uyghur. This is what the Chinese government reported on their state media. When most Uyghur men are taken to the camps or prisons or sent to the forced labor facilities, the women left at home are subject to sexual abuse inside of their own homes. Concentration camps, Orwellian surveillance, forced marriage, forced abortion, forced sterilizations, and the child abduction and organ harvesting are among the atrocities that my people are facing today. This is genocide by every definition described in 1948 Geneva Convention. And this reality is also being confirmed by around a dozen countries and the governments around the world, as well as the UN High Commissioner's Human Rights Report in the August 31st, 2022. It concluded that China's behavior could qualify as crimes against humanity.
So Rushan, I'm going to give Cheryl again, and we will come back to you. We also want to hear about the work. You come straight to us from campaigning against or for the TikTok bill right now that the U.S. Congress is working on, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that in the second round as well. So Cheryl, our Canadian colleague, joining us from One Child, focused on youth advocacy and education in the field of anti-trafficking. Tell us a little bit about why you were here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. So as Anna said, I'm the founder and president of One Child. So we are the first organization in the world empowering a child and youth-led movement against the sexual exploitation of children through prevention, education, advocacy, survivor care, and survivor empowerment. I founded the organization as a result of a high school project. When I was a teenager, I was researching for an issue completely different from sex trafficking and stumbled across the description of it. And I was filled with so much anger that children my age and younger were being exploited in this kind of way. And I thought to myself, I'm just a kid. I don't have any clout. I don't have any contacts. I'm just the daughter of immigrant parents. But what if I could do something as a kid to stop it? And so I ended up starting my organization, One Child, because I was frustrated at the time that a child like me and child survivors were being completely shut out or tokenized in the fight against sexual exploitation of children. So at One Child, what we do is we see children not just as a demographic to be protected, but as influencers, as innovators, as community mobilizers. And we give children the raw ingredients that they need. So the knowledge, the tools, the skills, the training, the network, the platform, the mentorship to be able to take their place as experts and influence policies and programs based on their lived experience. So I'm here because one of our goals moving into the future is to have young people working specifically with tech companies and co-designing programs and policies that protect them from sexual exploitation. So I'm here also to just learn and just to be a sponge from all of you and hear your best practices and see if there's any ways that we could explore synergies.
Cheryl, and for giving us that example. I think we're in a room full of people who seem to walk out of their door every day and say, what can I do about these huge, complicated global issues? And so it's wonderful to hear you say that, and also to talk about the participation of youth, of survivors, of, as was done in the morning panel, really thinking about how they should be involved in the creation of these tools. As we go around and move into sort of the meat of this session, what I did ask is for each of them to offer us some thoughts about how their organizations or their movement are very specifically using technology to fulfill their mission. And I'm going to start again with Brooke, because I know she has some very interesting examples. We're doing well with time, so feel free to be ample in your description of how your organization is using technology.
Thank you, Ana. And in Miami, gracias, Ana. I want to say that more to life, we have 4 offices in Florida. So Miami, our first building in Sarasota, we have an office in Tampa, and one in St. Pete. And it's a blessing to have those doors be open for 20 years. So a lot of survivor-founded organizations have closed, and I try to do my best to support those organizations as best I can as well. I think as a Google Fellow, I had the opportunity to spend some time in Silicon Valley. I've been a Google Fellow since 2017, and I still am. Oddly enough, it doesn't seem like it's going to end this year, so I feel really thankful for that. And it really opened up the door to me of stuff that I was really excited about as a child. And that was computer science, but things that I didn't get a chance to do. Because when I was trafficked, I didn't come from a poor family. I came from a highly educated family, but there's different types of poverty, and our family was emotionally poor. And I had a single mother, 4 different fathers. And so by the time I was rescued and I found myself in Hollywood trying to figure out who I was, I eventually said there's got to be more to life. As More to Life was born, I was always interested in innovation and how can we do things in a creative way to reach people. I'm a creative thinker, I'm an entrepreneur, but I felt like I was pushed out of the acting career, not because I wasn't doing well in it, but I just felt this calling. And there were kids living in my apartment in Hollywood, so I had to do something. And then when Google reached out, we went through this process for a year, and they asked me a question: what will you do? What could you do, Brooke, to scale up a solution for victims of trafficking, or anyone for that matter, around mental health? And we had a sign in India, and we got to see a lot of things about what's coming, what's been, and what's the propensity for things in the future. And so I met someone named Marion Croak. Marion Croak has over 200 patents. She's the reason we can video chat. And so I thought, well, I'll create something that is streamlined. At the time, we're Apricot. We're paying, I don't even know, $1,000 a month for a case management system that was a blank slate. And you have to pull these gears. And I was using it. It was my organization and one other one, Tina Frunt, if you know her from Courtney House. She told me about Apricot. And so we were the only ones using it at the time. And it kept going up, 1,000 to 1,500. The more employees, the more it kept going up. But it was a blank slate. And so over the years, when I wanted to pull out of it, they said, you don't own that data. You don't own everything you created. So when it was domestic minor sex trafficking and then commercial sexploitation and the name change and you do all this innovation, you don't own it. And I wanted to empower survivors. So I created my own, and it has a US patent, a US trademark, and 2 utility patents on the way. And basically we're streamlining for professionals, safe communication, supportive data, proprietary export, streamlined mentoring tools, adaptability, and then it was the first stacked mobile app. So end users that are survivors have a mobile app and a journal, safe communication, a chatting feature, geofencing around them, critical resources, mentoring, positive reinforcement. There's a HT tip report, making this social impact and huge potential that's really scalable. Now we're aggregating it over to provide sound surges with incredible musicians, in addition to AI and VR experiences. It's being beta tested by organizations like Melissa's and Rochelle's, and people absolutely love it. And so people went from paying $1,500 a month using our tech in the beta for only $100 a month, and they'll have that for life as we aggregate. My partners like Rosemary Mann, the guys that created Call of Duty, really just connected with a ton of mental health experts and gamers to build out something that would be a solution for victims of trafficking, and now anyone. And finally, I will say that the root causes of human trafficking are really predicated upon different aspects of mental health, behavioral health within families, within communities. And if we can provide a mental health scorum and spectrum for everyone, we have the greatest ability to, what John Cotton Richmond says, less than 1% of victims globally have been rescued. And the number in aggregate is getting higher. And I believe that mental health is a root cause.
to sort of think through and feel some of your words in that. That's very difficult. And we heard this morning, I think it was you who said something about how it starts in the family, right? And so here we are talking about solutions that start in the family as well. So I'm seeing lots of full circles here. Let us move to Rochelle and talk about how Collective Liberty in a different way is using technology to fulfill its mission.
So a huge gap we identified for locals was just like technical capacity. And you might be surprised, most of the stuff on NCIS doesn't even exist. Maybe it does in the military, but definitely not for cops. So they're using like, hi, officers, supervisor, can I print the pictures in color so I can cut them out and glue them on a poster board? Like, it's like really super basic in a lot of places. And more are getting different resources to help them sort of, for example, identify if people are connected and it's maybe organized crime instead of an individual, but they don't typically have sophisticated technical resources available to them. And if they do, it's like one analyst is trained on how to use it, or only 2 people have a user license, and there's just not robust access to it. And even if they have robust access, they don't even always know how to use it to the best of its ability, and there's all kinds of things, like they don't even have it. If they do, it's not really being maximized. So a lot of what we've been doing is building, and then another thing is a lot of what is offered to them is like a consulting firm had something they made for someone else, and they're like, well, if we tweak a few things, maybe it'll help the cops in this way. And so they don't want 42 different things they have to log into for each feature they need. They need like one solution, right? So I tried to get the the fusion centers that do organized crime intelligence analysis support for law enforcement, help with sort of like deconfliction. So if officers in some jurisdictions are undercover, they'll know about it. They won't accidentally out each other or accidentally kill each other. So there's stuff that exists. It's just sort of not as widespread as it could be, not as advanced as it could be. And if you're talking to the government tech and then you go talk to the for-profit tech, they're like decades between each other in terms of sophistication and quality of the technology. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to bridge that gap, make sure that as many local agencies as possible have the technology they need to build a strong organized crime winnable prosecution, to make it easier for them to do that in the first place. And then the main goal around that is when we ask, like, why won't they stop arresting people in the sex trade or migrant workers? Like, please, like, for example, if it's a migrant worker that's being employed, did you know the employer is also breaking a law? Why aren't you looking at that? What the heck, you know? So when we get all the excuses, we're like, okay, well, let me just find the solution to that excuse. And it's pretty valid, actually, that when we started collecting all of this data, putting it into we built a human trafficking fusion center. Basically, we're modeling the fusion center concept for human trafficking. And we bring in data from all the other cities. So in Philly, I'm just focused on Philly, right? So my case is as strong or as weak as whatever crimes they committed within the city and county of Philly. But if I have access to search my suspects, the phone numbers they're using, the addresses they're working at, in this database and see what else they're doing in other jurisdictions, it instantly makes my case a lot stronger and a lot faster than if I'm sort of like pulling at the threads, interviewing every victim 42 times, playing telephone tag with the records departments in all these other cities that I don't have a direct contact to. It's also allowing for them to more easily share case files with each other and just build stronger cases. I might be getting too in the weeds if y'all don't have a law enforcement background, so I could pull up if it's more helpful, but really what it is fixing the broken pieces of cross-city collaboration, because they're stuck within their cities, but traffickers don't care about jurisdictional boundaries, right? So helping them build it stronger. We also have been working with the major financial institutions because they're doing similar things. Like a lot of their models are trained on, oh, this looks like it's sex trade related, or oh, this looks like a potential wage issue. Let's just lock the accounts. And it's like, okay, but what if that's a sex worker? You just maybe they weren't being trafficked before, but you just created the path to vulnerability even stronger that they could end up being trafficked because they're like locked out of legitimate financing. So how do we help them make an organized crime algorithm and model so that when the suspicious financial activity gets bumped up to their analysts, and those analysts are reviewing all of the transactions and sort of mapping out like what the report should be. Are they looking for the right thing, and are they generating the right report, and are they then sending that report to the right people? So there's a lot of broken bits in the financial institution reporting to the cops that we're also working on, but we're trying to use tech to streamline a lot of that and get around privacy issues, because we're like really advanced in the private sector on encrypting data and really protecting privacy even on identifiable information. But in the nonprofit and government space, we're like, oh, there's a potential risk, so let's do nothing because we don't have enough money because it's really expensive to do it in the encrypted right way. So we're trying to bridge that finance gap as well. So basically, we're trying to bring all of the past 20 years advancement in the private sector to trickle down to all of us over here, that we shouldn't all have to find like $200 million per org to figure out the right way to do it, right? Like, how can we work together to do it? And then, oh, I'll save that for the next. Okay, yeah, so that's what we're doing.
Thank you. And what I might do is ask all of you to tell us a story based on that, but I'll give you some time to think about that, why we go to Rushan to talk about some positive ways in which you're working with technology to fulfill your mission.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, the Uyghurs are used for forced labor. The way of the Chinese government making this genocide a profitable venture for the CCP. While millions of people are working in forced labor facilities, and they are using the supply chains for the brands that we all use daily, and they're making all of us basically complicit in this genocide. But there's some ways of identifying which companies are using the cotton picked by Uyghur slaves by hand, and which tomatoes are used for making ketchup, or your car, which part of your car is being manufactured by the Uyghur slaves' sweat, blood, and the tears, and which shirt that you are wearing could be made by my sister, who's a retired medical doctor, and she was taken 5.5 years ago as a retaliation for my activism in America as an American citizen. When I exercised my freedom of speech, when I participated on a panel like this in Washington, D.C., and she was taken as a retaliation to silence me because it was broadcasted on YouTube, live streamed, and then only 6 days later, she was targeted and she's in jail today. So we are using some technology to test the cotton, and the Shein, as you know, the cheap online apparel clothing company, they are using the cotton picked by the Uyghurs, and we were being able to identify that, as well as Human Rights Foundation developed a Chrome extension on your search engine, or when you are looking for a website to purchase something, and that can identify if this company is using Uyghur forced labor for their supply chains. And recently, we are using the media, social media, and the regular conventional media to push back Volkswagen. They have a factory in Urumqi, and they are using the Uyghurs actually taken from their families, taken from their workplaces, and they shipped them over to the Volkswagen facility, and they are making profit of the Uyghur slaves. But they used some auditing firm in Berlin, and they just issued like one piece of document saying that our audit shows the Volkswagen is not using Uyghur slaves. We interviewed some people, but we exposed that, and we worked with Financial Times, and then we were able to put Volkswagen on the in front of the journalists and the social media to create public opinion, to pressure. And also BASF, one of the German chemical company, BASF, and they were also using Uyghur forced labor, and their joint venture company in Korla actually have documented how they were transferring the Uyghurs from the detention, which they were just detained for nothing, for their religion, for their ethnic identity, and they committed no crimes, but then they were shipped from the concentration camp to this a company that BOSS was working with. But again, we used the social media to expose that, and then BOSS finally exited the region. They stopped. And also, we have some negative things about the social media, like the X right now, the former Twitter and the Facebook, and also YouTube. They are suppressing when we post something, we realize that we don't get many viewers. And the Microsoft actually, if there was an article actually in Microsoft, if you search Microsoft and enter Uyghur genocide, you see all the victims' testimonies and the Chinese government leaked documents, all this basically evidence of the genocide. But if you search using VPN and pick any place in China, or anyone in China searches Uyghur, then they see the Uyghurs are smiling, dancing, and happy, and all kind of the genocidal denial propaganda by the Chinese government. If I can just take 2 more minutes talk about TikTok. There's a crucial, very critical bill is being introduced. Actually, it passed last Wednesday on the committee and marked up, and it's being voted on tomorrow. And the TikTok is actually owned by ByteDance, and the ByteDance is actually the company run by the CCP, the Chinese government's company. TikTok is not only collecting all the personal information and the data, and also spreading all kind of like suicidal videos, and the poisoning are used. And also same time, the Chinese government is using TikTok to whitewash the genocide. And the Uyghurs, they don't have access to any kind of social media, not just Uyghurs, any of the Chinese, ordinary Chinese citizens, they cannot use any kind of social media. Yet there's all kind of like videos that they put on YouTube or clips, and that they are advertising all kind of, propaganda and the stuff on the TikTok. And just want to add one more thing, the Hu Xijin, many of you may know who he is. He's the Chinese official, China's propaganda king, actually. Hu Xijin is pushing against the American bill about this TikTok bill that we are pushing at the Congress. So that tells you how important TikTok is for the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing the bill to our attention. You just told me about it right before this session, and so I do think it's quite relevant to this work. I hope you guys are beginning to think about some questions about how you're going to engage. I see some nods, good, because we do want you to ask some questions, but we're going to first go to Cheryl and hear a little bit about the positive ways in which you're using tech.
So back in 2005, as a kid, I turned to my friends and said, I can't stand on the sidelines knowing that this is happening to children my age and younger. Will you join me? And so a group of children, some as young as 13, who were my friends, came together and we founded One Child. And so what started off as a club of kids has grown to impact 122,000 children around the world in 16 countries. And I've been fighting for the past 20 years to get children, to create pathways for children to have their voices heard, and to have a seat at the decision-making table. And so one initiative that I'm quite proud of is something that our young people worked on. So this is in response to sex traffickers, ex-partners seeking revenge, and sextortionists who are trying to control their victims by threatening to spread their non-consensual intimate images. And so to counter this, in 2021, our child advocates between the ages of 14 and 17, they participated in the design of a website called Take It Down. So Take It Down is an initiative of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and it's supported by Meta. And its purpose is to give children, those under 18, control back if they fear that their images have been spread online. Parents as well as trusted adults can use the site on behalf of children, as well as adults can use it if they fear that their images have been spread of them when they were under the age of 18. So this is how it works. If I'm a child and I fear that my image has been, say, spread on Instagram, I can go to the platform and I follow the instructions. And what I can do is I can assign a specific hash value to the photo or video from my device. So a hash value is basically like a digital footprint. It's a mix of numbers and letters. And so once the hash is submitted to NCMEC, the platforms that have signed on, they find copies of the images or videos and take them down from their public and non-encrypted services. So along with Facebook, along with Instagram, the other platforms that have signed on are TikTok, Snapchat, OnlyFans, and Pornhub, to just name a few. So this initiative, this service is anonymous. The material never leaves the child's phone or device. It's completely private. The website has been translated to 25 languages. And since its launch in 2021 through to the end of 2023, NCMEC received over 89,000 unique hashes in over 48,200 submissions to take it down. So I'm showcasing this initiative not just because of the amount of submissions that were garnered, but because NCMEC and Meta consulted with children in the development of this tool. So what they did was they had focus groups held internationally in 10 countries where they talked to children about the tool, about even the name of the tool and how that would land culturally. For our kids, our youth advocates, they were able to give their impressions on the platform, give their ideas for the naming of it, their thoughts on the ease of the platform, and their ideas for the resources that should be on the platform as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So we got 4 very interesting examples here of the way tech can be a solution, as well as, of course, some identification of the ongoing and potentially future problems. Can we do, before we do sort of a last round with the group about the future, I asked them to think a sort of focus of what they'd like to see in the future. I'd love to go to the audience and see if there are any questions. We have a microphone here. Anyone ready for that? Not quite. It's over our heads. Can I ask you, Rachel, do you have a specific story around your work that you can share with us, why we let the audience continue to think about this?
It might help it make more sense too. I'll give a Florida one. So in the fall, a local police department reached out to us about a few massage parlors around a military base. They're like, we're pretty sure it's trafficking and there's a lot of indicators of it, but we're sort of struggling to prove that. And we don't want to go in and make arrests if it's consensual. So they gave us a few of the targets and we ran them through our database. We've identified over 15,000 sex traffickers, over 11,000 venues where trafficking is repeatedly happening, hundreds of thousands of labor traffickers. So we have all of that, and then tens of millions of forensic data points that help, like, okay, if this does hit on a trafficking case, who are their known associates, what locations are it happening at? So we can really help them quickly build out an entire network. So that's the database we were searching, and it pulled back like 3 different networks in 2 different states connected to it, and one person that was receiving all the money, and strong financial and circumstantial indicators that women were being moved around and not in control, and 2 people who are in control. So we're working on that case with them. Then the state's attorney's office reaches out about some separate thing on a licensing front, and it was connected to 7 of the parlors in those networks. So now it's like becoming a statewide thing. And then a financial institution reached out to us. They're like, there's this huge mess that I found. And my supervisors are like, it's too confusing. Like, just drop it, just file SR and move on. Can you help me convince them? And it was like blowing open this network, and it connected it to 3 labor trafficking things in Minnesota. And it was just like dozens of networks, dozens of like strong, clearly perpetrators. So now we're working with the Homeland Security's Center for Counter-Human Trafficking on a national case related to it. And had each one of them not had a resource like us, they would have just been, 3 of those cases would have been dismissed and 1 would have been pled out. Like, just being straight up with you, nothing would have happened. And if it did, it would have been so nominal that the consequences, like, they would have just kept operating while on probation, basically. It would have been 0 consequences. So The data sharing, we're proactively collecting the data, and because we're building those contacts, we can just quickly connect them to the right person in the right agency and streamline a lot of the bureaucratic BS as well. So that's the most recent example in Florida, meeting with HSI in a couple weeks. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Brooke, do you have a story that you could share to us that would give us sort of a real understanding?
I'd love for Melissa to stand at the mic since no questions came, and I'd love for her to share a story of how our technology has supported her organizations, because it's always good to hear from someone else.
I love that. That's great.
Well, it is a true privilege to speak about the impact that this tech has. And I want to start with why I think there is such a massive need for this tech. I've worked with survivors for over 12 years now. And one of the deficits that I think so many service providers experience, leading to burnout, exhaustion, frustration, is that for so many survivors, they have a bad day. And that bad day can lead to such desperate discouragement that they think that the work that they've put in is meaningless, that the months of school or therapy is worthless. They have nothing to measure it against. And one of the features that I love about this app is that the case manager and the survivor have been tracking measurable impacts, measurable successes throughout the whole time. So when that survivor is having a bad day, and when I say this is vital, I literally know multiple survivors that on those bad days left the program and went back to exploiting because they felt like they were worthless, that their work was meaningless. So to have evidence right in front of them that the case manager and them have been tracking together is life-changing or life-giving. And I can't think of a better way to offer them hope than showing them the work that they've done themselves. So it's needed. It is literally changing lives, and it's a true honor to partner alongside Dr. Bellows in this journey.
Wow, thank you very much. That was very powerful. Thank you. And I'm so glad you know everybody so well so that you can just reach out and ask for testimony.
I try to be friendly. I just want to add to that the goals, tasks, and challenges feature is connected to measurements, objectives, and outcomes. So not only is it supportive to the practitioner on the web app platform, but the mobile app that the survivor has in their hand wherever they are in the world. And those things are measurable for funding and for the sort of facilitation of understanding that I have. You know, sometimes people are not able to measure how a particular victim, survivor, overcomer has done well. If someone's coming out of foster care, they used to run away every week. Now they're in your program. DCF might say, well, they're still running away. No, but they ran away 20 times last year. They only ran away 5 this year. This is success. Tracking that is really important. The other aspect is we're tracking all the offerings. So let's say you offer someone a ton of different services and they say no, you can go back to that. Also, I think the stories around the chatting features, when someone loses their phone and they download it again, there's geofencing to know where they are, but then all of their journal is there, all of their chats are there, all of the communication is there, and they can always get in touch. And finally, there's a global resource feature that is connected to Polaris Project. And so any victim or survivor anywhere in the world can connect to services where they are. Yeah, and there's more, but I won't. You can always call us and we can do a demo for free and show you more about it.
Oh, that's great, because it is important to know how to access some of this tech that we're talking about. For sort of the last round of a question, I asked our panelists to think sort of about the future, about how they would like to be using technology, maybe for specifically in their organization, how they would like to see it used in this field, and or advice to some of their peer organizations. And Cheryl, I'm going to actually start with you with a sort of future vision.
Yeah, sure. So at One Child, we run the largest and most comprehensive prevention, education, early intervention program on sex trafficking in Canadian schools. And what we've heard from children is that business as usual, as in well-intending adults who may be a bit out of touch, lecturing children about sex predators isn't always the most effective. And so I just want to highlight one quote from one of our child advocates and what she had to say about the current state of affairs. She said, "We need to modernize and adapt current methods of speaking to kids in schools. Assemblies are great because they provide easy access to a large audience of children, but they're dreaded the most. Kids are going into an assembly waiting for it to end. Am I about to see a presenter who reflects me? Am I about to see someone young like me, or might have grown up with social media like me? Or am I about to see my dad that doesn't know how to turn on the flashlight on his phone? I am going to perk up a bit when I see someone young. So we don't want you to tell us what not to do. Tell us what to do to combat online exploitation using our devices. Tell kids how you think they're competent, capable, impactful, and motivate them to use their devices to fight this issue." And so at One Child, what we're doing is we're continuing to rely on our trusted model of youth-designed and youth-delivered presentations and workshops that are motivational, enthusiastic, entertaining, lighthearted, and that draw children in to be a part of the fight, but leveraging the power of AI, social media, texting, and gaming platforms. So we know, for instance, predators prey where children play. So we have plans to use the very same platforms that where children are being exploited, but we're planning to use them to empower children to be safe. So take, for example, Roblox. What we're hoping to do in the future is to partner with community STEM programs and universities and to work with children, survivors as well, to teach children through these platforms how to identify red flags, what they can do about them, how they can be good digital citizens, and how they can lead awareness and advocacy initiatives. So the benefit of this is that, of course, it's also accessible to kids who are out of school, and it is also available to schools that aren't ready to take on the responsibility of educating children on the issue because they're still nervous about it, because we can't wait. And the other tool that we're looking to do is to enhance these presentations and to increase interaction. And so what we're trying to do is we're planning to use VR and the metaverse to depict real life scenarios that are informed by children and survivors. And that would again teach them how to navigate these situations and apply them to real life.
Wow, great. Ambitious plans for the future. And it sounds like there might be some others on the panel who can actually connect you to some of that technology. So I hope those conversations are happening as well. Rushan, give us a vision of the future from your perspective.
I foresee us using technology more for our work, especially AI and the social media, and to understand the CCP's disinformation and narratives. Our movement needs to counter the Chinese government's propaganda machine with truth on a much larger scale. We also need to continue to give people streamlined calls to action, tools online, so that as far and more people become aware, they know exactly what to do to make an impact. The Uyghur genocide is an example of the greatest advancement of our age: social media, facial recognition, and AR being used for the most sinister purpose. The CCP has used these tools in order to develop the most modern, high-tech, and model for oppression, genocide, and the genocide denial. This technology is the present and the future, I'm sorry. If the CCP is mastering them for evil, we need to make sure we are going to utilize them for good. We need to think hard about how the technology can use to counter the CCP and also work to develop models for accountability for the technology. The Uyghur genocide is one of the most unnatural, egregious stain on humanity. If it left unaddressed, tomorrow we will witness our children becoming the victims of an illiberal world, that there's no humanity and no respect for human dignity. If we don't raise our voice today, tomorrow, the only voice left will be one of regret.
Thank you so much, Rushan. I did want to ask about these tools that you described before that allow consumers to understand and make choices about the products that they're. Do you see that advancing and widening as well? Because those seem like very critical tools.
Yes, the Chinese government is getting away today with this genocide because they are continuously making money. And the companies who are also making money, the CEOs and the people who are supposed to be so vocal and protect human rights and very vocal against any kind of social injustice, you don't see them speaking out about this, about the genocide, about the child abduction. And while the Chinese government openly celebrating their efforts by posting on the social media, on the Twitter account, Chinese embassy actually used their Twitter account and posted saying, after forced sterilizing the women and the Uyghur birth rate dropped down to 0%, they posted and they said, the Uyghur women are no longer baby-making machines. 13 tons of human hair made it over to United States Customs and Border Patrol. How many lives 13 tons of hair represents? And we don't see this being spread on social media, or people are not aware of what's happening. So if we can only educate people, so every platform is important. That's why I thought this forum here, this panel is so important for me to come and educate people, because once we know what's going on and then use the technological tools available to push back, because it's not just about the future of the Uyghurs or saving the Uyghurs anymore, it's about our principles. We should not be making profit. We should not be knowingly seeing the Uyghurs are being used as slaves for our goods. Our companies should not be making all of us enablers of this genocide. We can only push that when we educate ourselves and use those technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rochelle, why don't you give us a future? And we do have a question I saw, so okay, so we'll do that really quick. But Rochelle, why don't you give us your future vision?
Quickly, I would just say that I would love to scale into the service provider realm a little more quickly than we've been able to. For a lot of reasons, they have a lot of the similar issues that I described, but mostly because I think we'll finally be able to get a prevalence estimate if we can de-identify and then show, like, okay, maybe everyone's had 1,000 survivors that they've helped, which ones were duplicate in different cities, and let's try to like start getting real numbers in a way that is protecting everyone's identity and making sure that nothing is revealed. So I'm really passionate about trying to bring a solution to that area also.
Thank you. Thank you. Brooke.
I think that, well, thank you, everyone. God, it's really incredible panel. I really want to see the efficacy of prevention at a larger scale globally. And so for our technology venturing into game doodles and different things to really reach survivors and individuals all over the world, and bridging it over for anyone who has a mental health need. We're beginning to work with frequency and sound. Obviously, the VR experience is using EMDR therapies and training AI to do certain communications depending on who you are, where you come from, and then having this promise coming from where we come from to never sell that data and to make that something that is always useful. And then lastly, joining this world with VCs, there's so many new tech companies starting, and so I get a chance to educate these new startups with millennial and young gamers about this space. And I think sort of bridging over them to create a hedge fund or some type of fund from tech companies to fund the prevention of trafficking is another passion of mine that I hope I have time for.
I don't doubt that you will have time for it. Bukini, please give us your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much, Anna. Great moderation and wonderful thought out there. I think what I get from the discussions is while we make sure the usage of the technology is available, but I think we are still struggling, at least in the movement, when it comes to access to technology. And this access is really very unbalanced between some socio-economic divides, some racial divides, and also some some regional divides as well. For example, it is clear that not everyone knows how to use, AI. Not everyone knows how to use some of these apps, etc., in terms of prevention or even among those vulnerable groups. So I think my question to you all is, within your respective field, how do you see this divide evolving comparing to the evolution of technology? And what do you think as a movement we can do to kind of to end those divides?
Thank you. Who would like to tackle that?
Well, Robert, Robert, you sure you don't want to answer this? Because you have a really good response to this. I just feel it in my bones. You do. I know you do.
Thanks. I feel like I am representing a 200,000 person company, much more than I thought that I would be. I think one of the key pieces, and this actually ties into some of the conversations that we were having earlier today, is that it's incumbent upon companies like Microsoft to listen more proactively, to understand what those types of collaborations and skilling needs would be. It, on the sort of altruistic side, I think will make a better society for all of the employees of the company and all the people who are using the products. I think on the it's a for-profit company side, everyone will love us and want to use all of our products if we teach everyone how to use our products and build them so that they can be used better. I think that part of that has to do with creating strong relationships with for-profit companies, with, to be fair, as folks were talking about fundraising and the survival of nonprofit organizations, it's not everyone's priority to come to a company like Microsoft and say, what can our nonprofits or what can our anti-trafficking community do to help you help us? Instead, usually the request that I get is like, how much free software can you give us? And in addition to software, how big will the check be? And I don't write checks, so I always get to refer that to someone else. But I think, a group like Free the Slaves is a great example where you're connected with so many organizations. The more proactive that you can be with a company like Microsoft and say, we want to do initiatives like this. I think that that's why Tech Against Trafficking has been so successful and why so many companies like Microsoft have wanted to participate, and Amazon and others, is that we want to build the pathways for every nonprofit working on issues, whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, any kind of exploitation, to use our products, to use them effectively. We love telling those stories. Everyone who works at Microsoft wants to be able to say, and they used our product for this thing that helped change someone's life. But it has to be a proactive effort on the part of organizations working on this issue to say, we're going to set aside time, we're going to set aside, staff, brain space to work with you, and we're going to commit to more than a month or two or a meeting or two to try to see this through. And I think the folks who are up on that panel right now are an example of folks who've made a commitment to say, we're going to take technology forward, not just as we're going to think about it or brainstorm, but this is really going to be part of how we build our movement moving forward.
I want to just add to that, when I kind of see this idea of a global summit or global forum. That was awesome, Robert. I knew you had a great answer. Where people are coming to train and to learn with big tech companies. Tech companies have a division where they send people out without charge to the nonprofit. Can you imagine all these booths set up at a summit that the nonprofit didn't have to pay for them to come in? They're doing it because there's going to be a large audience, and they're learning, how do we use VR? How do we use AI? How do we partner with you? How do we understand algorithms? That would be one of the best conferences ever. And I think we have to bring in tech. Sometimes we're ostracizing technology a lot in the anti-trafficking movement, but we need to partner with them a lot more in a healthier way.
Great. So I do think I'm getting looks from Davina and other organizers that it's time to bring this to a close. I want to make sure we get a picture for sure. And I want to thank you all for bringing different perspectives on this, different examples. I have more in my pro column now to add and to balance out the con column, and I'm sure others do as well. And that ending note on partnerships and learning from each other and crossing into some of the different silos that exist, I think is in learning from different fields, I think is really an important takeaway for me. So thank you very much to you all, and thanks to you all for listening.
Hello. Oh, thank you. So thank you for a great panel. I think there's so much to digest and take away from that. One of the things that I think we're really hearing a lot about, though, is how tailored a lot of these efforts are to really target the populations we're trying to serve, whether they're minors that are, focus grouping and testing these apps, or even looking at how data can be used in new and innovative ways to serve our populations. I think this is really an important component. And I also really appreciate the comments around venture capitalism and how we raise funding to make this more sustainable, and of course, how to do that in new ways. So now we're going into two concurrent workshops. We have the Data-Driven Policies and Security for Survivors, led by Megan Lundstrom, who, as you may know, is also sharing her book. I think, Megan, I haven't given you a formal introduction yet, so I'm very excited to give you one of mine. So Megan is the director of the Resilience Fund for Polaris, and she's actually done some really incredible work with her lived experience. She shared her own financial records from her time in Under Control, and was actually able to publish a whole series of survivor-led research with Polaris on the basis of that, and really innovated for their financial intelligence unit. So Megan is such a trailblazer in this space, and I'm so excited for you to hear from her, in addition, of course, to the book that she's selling here today, and that we can all benefit from in terms of financial strategies that aren't just for survivors. They're for pretty much anyone. We can all benefit from financial resiliency, I think. So Megan's workshop, I believe, will be staying here. Is that what you understood, Megan? Did anyone tell you where you're going to be? Okay, speaker's prerogative. Megan will be staying here, just because it's the first listed one. And then Robert, you'll be leading the assessing the risks, addressing inherent risks and barriers of greater reliance on technology and trafficking prevention. And I believe there's also an activity engaging in that assessment. That'll be next door, where there's also the inducement of not just Robert's brilliant remarks, but coffee and pastries. So I think you've got two very exciting options. We are running a little bit behind. So since we're at 4 o'clock, I think that we'll give you like a warning for each of the workshops when they're terminating. But let's say we plan on keeping between like the 30 to 40 minute mark, if that's okay for the speakers. So we'll try to convene as quickly as possible. So if everyone can get to the workshop room that they're planning on attending, we'll move right on. Thank you all.
Someone's listening. He's on now. If you are staying in this room, can you move up towards the front to the front tables? We're going to be doing some discussion work, and so I'd love for you guys to be able to talk amongst yourselves and also for me to be able to hear you well. Perfect. Yeah, everybody needs to wake up. No, I'm okay, thank you. Yeah. I have no idea. I've never seen that screen.
Yeah, because I was looking at my camera. It was looking
Okay. So I'm going to start off with two, I don't want to call them case studies because they're just stories about different experiences that I've had over the last 10 years that kind of tie into data. So the first one, as Davina mentioned, this project that I did in partnership with Polaris long before I actually joined the Polaris team officially. I was in Washington, D.C. for actually the Traffic Analysis Hub launch. And I was talking with a few people in the room, and I mentioned that I had all of my bank statements from about 18 months of my trafficking. And I had just saved them because it was a dream project of mine to be able to analyze those statements and to be able to understand the story behind those financial transactions. And so Sarah Crow, who helped create the financial intelligence unit at Polaris, overheard me talking. And she was like, hey, I'm gonna give you my card. I'd love to connect with you on this. And so long story short, she worked with PayPal and some of the other financial institutions, and they were able to fund this project. And so I got to work for about 6 or 9 months analyzing the data, putting it together, and then co-authoring a report, which is over, you can scan the QR code over on the table in the other room to download it. But this report is the first of its kind. So it's looking at financial transaction behaviors across 3 different periods during my exploitation. So one where I had a boyfriend pimp, one where I had a CEO pimp, and then one where I was engaging in adult voluntary sex work. And looking at the differences in the financial transaction behaviors during those periods of time, mapping it all over the US, lots of different lessons learned in that report. And so you can see my face here. I was so delighted because I got to ultimately present this to the FIU at Polaris for all of the financial institutions and to share that information. And so one of the individuals from one of the banks afterwards, Sarah texted me and she was like, oh, I just got this quote. She shared the message from one of the anti-money laundering specialists that was there. And he had already gone back to his team and started looking at different typologies of trafficking and how transactions will show up differently based on those different typologies. Because at the time they had these like very broad rules of like, this is what money laundering looks like. And so that paradigm shift for them, they were able to start looking at different typologies and how those might show up. So this, for me personally, as somebody with lived experience, was a very empowering way of telling my story and taking my story and turning it into data that was very useful to financial institutions in anti-trafficking work. Now, anybody here ever filled out a federal grant report? They're a nightmare, they're not very fun. So for the first 8 years of working in this field, I founded and ran a direct service nonprofit serving individuals who had experienced commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. And we had federal funding amongst other sources. And so this is just a screen grab of one of those reports, and you can see the number of victims identified there through the different ways. Shout out to Freedom Signal. Freedom Signal's up there. And as a service provider, when I was doing these grant reports, not only were they tedious and painful, and I had a million other things that I'd rather do with my time, but when I look at those numbers, 2,600 victims potentially connected with during some of those campaigns. But that's a big number, and it doesn't capture how many individual stories are there. So this is just one data point, but it's 2,600 stories. And so that was always really hard for me as a service provider to know that I am taking people's lives and turning them into these little numbers and dashes in a spreadsheet. And where is that spreadsheet going? Who is it being shared with? How is it being stored? How are those numbers being combined with other numbers? There's so many questions out there, right? And so I share both of these stories because I want to show the reality of a dual role as someone with lived experience who has also been a direct service provider. And I've been on both sides of kind of these story sharing and data collection experiences. And there's things that I would have done differently in both of these scenarios. There's things that if I had the opportunity to do them again, I would approach them very differently. But the big piece that I want you all to be thinking about here as we talk about data today and tomorrow is that data at the end of the day is stories. Those are our lives. And so there's no amount of numbers that you can put in spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets. I love them. But there is no, data collection can feel very clinical, very cold, and removed from the reality of the stories that are filling those columns and rows in a spreadsheet. So we're talking a lot, and my session description says that we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, but we're going to take a zoom back from artificial intelligence as a tool and start thinking before we get to this tool and this partner in our work. So lived experience is authentic intelligence. And that's where all of this starts. For good and bad, with biases, with strengths and weaknesses, it is us as humans that are creating artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence is only as good as we are as humans because we created it. But when we create it, we need to be thinking who we want to serve at the end and including those folks in the creation process from the beginning. So authentic intelligence informs artificial intelligence. And that's what I want to talk with you all about today. And because I love sociology, I cannot present anything without some sort of a framework. So this is the first framework that I want to talk about, and I'm going to ask you all to share, ask questions, discuss amongst yourselves. So when we look at this framework, this is the 6 elements of person-centered care. So starting at the top, involvement of family and friends, understanding of individual preferences, empathy, shared goal setting and decision-making, active listening, and open-ended questions and reflective conversations. So I have some questions that I'm going to ask you all and want to hear from you on. But using these 2 examples that I shared at the beginning, where I had this amazing experience as somebody that got to tell my story and turn it into data, and then also this experience as a service provider, taking other people's stories and quantifying them into data. Looking at this person-centered care. So my first question for you all is what power dynamics are in play in each of these examples? And what might you do to decrease some of these power dynamics? That would be great. Thanks, Brooke. So the question is, what power dynamics are in play in each of those stories that I gave? And what are ways that you could decrease those power dynamics? So in the first example, getting to work with Sarah Crow, the power dynamic, there was a power dynamic there, right? Like, she works for this organization. I'm a survivor, I'm a contractor. This organization has the money, I'm working for the money. There's lots of power dynamics there. So one of the ways that she decreased these was she actually scheduled time with me to review the contract as an independent contractor before I signed it. So not just sent it over with all this legalese, but she took the time to walk me through each section and make sure that to answer any questions I had. So that's one example, but I would love to hear others. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if we're creating like a paradigm, I guess, of, thank you, of how to like really, I guess, equalize maybe or democratize access for survivors to like funders and other research projects, which is huge because of course so many funders don't have the time to do what Sarah did, and Sarah was like amazing at that. But I would even wonder if one of the things that we've thought about with some of our UN work was actually, although it's great to go over our terms of agreement, we call them terms of agreement or schedules with our contractors, what would be even better is to allow them like independent representation, right? Because then I'm interpreting the contract that I'm giving you, vice, you know, someone else who doesn't have an interest or work for me, whatever, doing that, which maybe is like, if there was something like a Martina Vanderberg thing, right? Like where she could just be like, so the survivors are offered these contracts with these known organizations or unknown. What do you think about, like, what are the standard labor things you might want to consider? It's just, and nothing against Sarah, of course, you know, and I've worked for Polaris too. I know that, you know, that's not, but it is an interesting question, right? Because that power dynamic is still enshrined in the terms we offer.
Yeah.
And then we say like, this is normal for us, or this is what I have, but that may not mean that it's, you know, best practice.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Who else? Yeah.
It just makes me think, I don't know if I have a recommendation on this, but one thing that comes up a lot when we're working with clients and we're trying to get their feedback or to kind of create space for their own testimonials is that sometimes they may have, unfortunately, a sense of indebtedness to us as a service provider, despite active attempts to not create that power dynamic, but just the nature of being the one providing the services for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we're always in our organization very concerned about, because we're worried about asking them, like trying to provide space for them to have a platform if they want to share testimony, but making sure that it's not out of feeling they have to because we as a service provider asked.
Yeah.
So making sure it's not framed as a question, but as an option if they so choose.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
An example you gave, at least the way that you described it, seemed much less satisfactory. So I think it can be, especially with big institutions like U.S. government is providing funding, it can be very, for anyone, any recipient of funding, very opaque to understand why. And then is there an opportunity actually offered to understand why that spreadsheet can actually be helpful to your mission, because it feels very clinical and not human and not humane. And if you don't have that conversation, if you don't get to sit down with Sarah Crow and walk through it and ask the questions, it doesn't necessarily feel good. So I think looking at that, like open-ended questions and reflective conversations, someone might feel better about that spreadsheet if they understand, like, this is our way to communicate to the funder, i.e. Congress, you know, how to get more funding for you and organizations like you. But if that conversation doesn't happen and there's not the opportunity to ask questions, then people don't feel like it's contributing to anything. It's just like pulling out from them. And so I think that could help. It's just like that sharing of information. Now, maybe those agencies do that or not, I don't know. But it's a way that I think any institutional funder could help understand how that's contributing to the mission or not, and then have a conversation about, okay, and then here's how you could make it more humane on our end, because we're the ones who have to fill it out, because not everyone loves spreadsheets. But I'm glad you do.
And you bring up so many really good points. So thank you for sharing that. And when you think about what Demita shared and what you just shared, sometimes there's more opportunities for control for the survivor. There are more opportunities to decrease that power imbalance. And sometimes there's systems in place and there's reasons why these structures exist that we have to operate within. And so that's where that transparency and just that opportunity for dialogue can be really important, and can build trust in, okay, maybe I don't understand this, or like maybe these spreadsheets are painful, but I do conceptually understand and feel comfortable and know that they're going into, you know, whatever is next, and they're informing decisions further up the chain or wherever. So my next question then, in thinking through these two stories, and again, to this point of understanding kind of the landscape, what are the benefits to the survivor or survivors in each of these examples?
Yeah. And you can tell other people prevent that, but, oh, sorry. That's a really good question. I really wonder, because even in all these power dynamics and all research, even if the research subject isn't a survivor, right? Like if it's just anyone, how, like, I love that idea of shared goal setting and decision making, but most researchers might not care, right? And that's the problem. So, but also what is the benefit to you?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you wanted to do this, you wrote a book. I mean, you have
Right.
a lot of insight that you did come out of this, which is a great example of how to do it, I think.
Yeah.
But for most survivors, they may not be in the same, they may not have the same place of healing or ability to use that the way that you were able to.
Right. So there may be some shared common benefits that survivors collectively, because we're not a monolith, right? Like we all have our own preferences and benefits. Brooke, do you want to add to that?
I was going to say, more to life, like shared goal setting has been good in group therapy sessions and decision making. So when survivors hear, I'm addicted to this or that, and so the goal set is, we're going to fight forward to get past this particular addiction, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's addicted to trauma, going back to a trafficker, or just addicted to drama. Almost like AA, there is support in groups in that sense. And then from the strength of those group settings, you build this sort of peer, and then you begin to say, okay, you have another goal, I'm gonna support you in that even though it's not my goal. And so I think it's quite powerful.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. In both of these stories, so one of the things that I've had a lot of conversations internally at Polaris as we're building the Resilience Fund is the concept of risk. And that it is a kind of a double-sided, it's a coin, right? Two sides of the same coin, where trust building is on the other side of risk. And so a risk model is what you create in the absence of trust. Trust building takes a long time, and it's not clear-cut across all relationships. And so risk management and risk modeling really looks at how do we build something efficiently to serve the most people the best we can, whereas trust building requires lots of relationships and an individualized understanding. But when we look at big organizations or established systems, some risks aren't actually risks, they're discomforts. Because it's just always been done that way, right? If that's the reason behind it, well, we've just always done it that way. There's probably not a risk, it's a discomfort, and it's probably a power imbalance that is just normalized. So in both of these examples, what discomforts or risks to the organizations involved can you see in those scenarios, either as I described them or in some of these kind of hypotheticals that we just discussed?
Questions and reflective conversations, I think some people might find discomfort in hearing things they weren't expecting or that challenge what their bias is expecting to come out of it. And then in my experience, the person on the receiving end can feel all of that. So it could just be actually still toxic, even if you have those questions.
Yeah, great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Yes.
In terms of open-ended questions and reflective conversations, I think that, I love, positive disruption or disruption for good, right? Let's make good trouble. And I think good trouble is when you hear things that are hard, but if the setting is right. So if there's an active listener there who's an incredible therapist or counselor that can mitigate some of the issues that could be harmful, then growth happens after combustion. That's when you get to the other side of pain, and that can be quite powerful.
I love that. It reminds me, I went on a therapy wilderness retreat, which was, I'm not built to sleep in a tent on the ground, is what I took away from that trip. But the other thing that I took away from that trip was the therapist that facilitated that trip said, we don't do safe spaces, we do brave spaces. And so they were like, we're not going to hold you with kid gloves and kind of like sugarcoat things for you.
we're gonna get in the mud with you and you're gonna cry it out and stomp it out, and we're here and we're gonna figure it out. And so that, what you just shared, Brooke, reminded me of that. So this framework is my absolute favorite framework, other than stages of change model, to talk about. And this is a ladder of participation. It was originally developed for youth participation and then just general community and citizen participation. But I learned about this from Rachel Lloyd, founder of GEMS, and she broke it down and applied it through survivor leadership and what survivor leadership can look like. And it's a really good tool to assess as an organization how organizations interact and include and work alongside folks with lived experience. So down in the bottom, you have manipulation and then therapy as non-participation. So receiving services. In the middle, you have that consulting and informing. And so there are degrees of tokenism that can happen with that. Coming in as a consultant where there is that power dynamic of I can create something, but at the end of the day, I don't really have any say in how it's used, what's taken from it, those kinds of things. And then at the top, you have the citizen power or survivor leadership, and truly a survivor-centered space. And so at the very top is survivor ideation and ally supported. And so when I think back to those two examples, just to kind of bring it back home, that first example, working with Sarah Crow, was a survivor-initiated, ally-supported activity. And it ended up being a really beautiful project all the way around. I benefited from it, Polaris benefited from it. We all went into it knowing what that project was going to be, what we were all going to contribute to it. So I love talking about this and really thinking about, but what does it look like in practice, right? So in those two examples, who owns the data? I had to go back and look because I was like, did I own the data? So I own the data in that project. And then Polaris and the Avery Center own the shared final product. Yeah. Yep. Probably. And that feels gross. Davina said they didn't buy my data because it could have cost potentially more to purchase the data versus contracting me, but it also would have been gross, is what I said.
Yeah, I was asking if it was in her contract actually, because that's an interesting question about where data ownership ends up. Of course, like I use data a lot and I'm a researcher, so it makes sense that the researchers, like the firm, would own the research product that they co-contributed to, but the data would always be retained. Otherwise, like I said, Megan would be entitled to much more money because she was just being paid for her time, presumably, vice like ownership of the data. But yeah. That's an interesting question though, like who then owns, because it was a co-production, the report, right? Mm-hmm. That's interesting because normally people don't do that. Even if survivors provide all the input, like even if it's a research project of trafficking victims, survivors, they still aren't billed as co-authors. I think that leadership and design and maybe the partnership was truly embodied in that way. That's interesting. Yeah. A good example.
Any thoughts on the second example? And all those data points?
I hope the organization would own it if it's a grant, but I don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And Brooke, your example on the panel about Apricot, my heart sunk when I heard that because we had actually looked at Apricot as one of the CRM options at the Avery Center. And I'm so glad, I breathed out a sigh of relief after hearing, like, Those are the things that when we think about the amazing power that technology can bring, so instead of having handwritten case notes that we keep in a locked metal filing cabinet, we have these CRMs that are accessible, they're stored on the cloud, there's all these things, but where is that data? Who owns the data at the end of the day? Yes.
I think the question of ownership for me and working with like Indigenous survivors of trafficking is, I think like it has another element there. And it makes me, like particularly the second example you gave kind of made me think about how unintentionally, I think as service providers, even though like we claim to be survivor centered, oftentimes kind of like unintentionally, because we're thinking we need this grant, we need this, we need that, we're just feeding them all this information, and it can become quite extractive, I think, for survivors, and can sort of reproduce the cycle of like exploitation, I think, that we claim to be supporting survivors through. Like, for example, one of the organizations or groups we partner with in Canada, we were submitting an application through Wage, and it's called Women and Gender Equity in Canada. And on the funding application, we had to list like, how many bundles of sage do you need? Like, one by one, how many did you use last year? How many braids of sweetgrass? And so we had to go back and say like, well, we're just gonna use like whatever, you give us the money and we'll buy however many like sacred medicines we need. So I think like, if it's possible to sort of push back on those funding applications that feel really exploitative of survivors, which then, you know, if you do that long enough where you feel like, oh, am I contributing to this? It's like the moral injury sets in and you don't feel like you're doing work that's aligned with you, which is like really dangerous. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I love the term extraction. So I just got a book called Research as More Than Extraction, and I'm super excited to read it. But it also reminds me, so this is my shameless plug to go to the panel tomorrow morning with my colleague, Sarah. But at Polaris, we've been talking about, instead of data governance, data stewardship. And really like that reframe from like, we're just taking, we're extracting, to it is an honor to hold these stories, and we need to be really mindful about how we share them. But Sarah.
No, I think you just sort of took what I was going to say. But no, I think one of the things that I keep thinking about data ownership is what are the questions that we are trying to solve for by asking about data ownership? Like, is it about compensation? Is it about the specific benefits someone actually would get? Or is it about sort of having the power to say, how is it used? And anything else? I don't know. I'm like, we're really, like Megan said, we're still struggling through that, because the hotline data, it is data that's sort of used to inform the field, and it's very, very powerful, but it's also, you know, those are all stories of people that actually live those lives. So like, what do they have a say in how we use it, and how do they get a benefit from it? So I'm curious about what other questions we should be answering around data ownership.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Sarah's one of my favorite thought partners at Polaris. So this question comes up all the time in direct service work, not just in this field, and it's really an ethics one. But when we look up here and we see that somebody may be engaged in therapy or direct services at an organization, but can they also inform on data stewardship or policies of an organization while receiving services? And how do you navigate things like that? I'm a survivor. What if I need to receive services? How do you navigate those boundaries and make sure that somebody, it's come up a few times, the theme of the indebtedness, that I owe you something because you are meeting my basic needs right now. So how do we navigate those concepts? And would love to hear your thoughts on whether you've experienced this, observed it, have found solutions. It's a really important one.
We try to reframe, because obviously we're a frontline service agency, and it's critical for us to receive feedback from our clients, survivors, about the work we're doing. Is it working? Is it not working? What do you want? All the things.
Yeah.
And because of the question of indebtedness, we created sort of a rule that we're now building into like a board-approved policy, which is that if we are providing the service to the client, it's free to them because that's our funding model. However, if we're seeking them out after the service to provide feedback to us, they're providing a service and thus they must be paid for it. And we try to ensure that even if they provide feedback during the service delivery portion of it, them providing the service then makes them the service provider to us if they're giving us that feedback, and just trying to build that into a formal policy and finding a way to articulate it. And I think that's not a perfect solution. It's kind of our starting point for that heavier conversation. But yeah, and I look forward to hearing more feedback from the group.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
One of the things that we at NTSA encourage service providers to implement is a clear structure for letting those in the program currently have their voices heard and having the opportunity to share that at multiple levels. One risk that we have to acknowledge is that we could have problematic employees. In fact, if you talk to service providers or like the executive directors, they'll say, working with the survivors is not the biggest challenge, it's the employees. And so if that's the case, and we all acknowledge that, then what are mechanisms in place for the participants to report grievances, concerns, or frustrations about the program or individual staff without concerns of repercussions? And so when I go in and do assessments or analysis on programs, one of the key things that we're looking for is what are your reporting avenues for participants to share grievance protocols. That's something that I think in Square America is pretty standard, but less standard in these programs. I also just want to promote, advocate, advise that we never use stories, narratives, or anything from survivors when they're actively engaged in the program, because there's no way to not acknowledge the power dynamic. I get very sensitive when a program says, oh, we asked them and they gave us permission. And you have to question, how much do they actually have confidence that there would be zero consequences for saying no? You can't be confident in that. They have years and years of consequences for saying no, so we can't be sure. So don't use survivor stories, narratives, whatever, while they're in the program. And on top of that, when, let's say you did contract with them to use their story, use their data, I think that there should also be an expiration date, that this isn't like a one-time sign the dotted line, we paid $50 for your story, we gave you a Target gift card, an Amazon $100 gift card, so now we get to use your story indefinitely, but instead advocating for, okay, for 2 years, this is what we've contracted for, or something like that.
What you just said, thank you for that. What you just said reminded me of the woman from One Child talking about the NCMEC campaign, and it brought to mind like the concept of storytelling and data sharing. And there is no way to revoke consent a lot of times because of technology. So technology has this beautiful power to amplify and share things on a massive platform very quickly, to collect and synthesize information and stories. But then we do have kind of this just generalized, normalized practice, particularly in direct services and in the anti-trafficking space of, well, we gave you a $50 gift card, so we get to use this wherever we want to from now on. Yeah.
Is that's an interesting point, Megan, because disaggregating the data once it's already been included becomes almost impossible, and that goes on years on into the future. Like for the Global Slavery Index and the all of our UN data sets for the global estimates, I mean, if one person were to revoke their consent, honestly, I don't even know how we would take it out, right? And how would we?
What do you do?
And a lot of it's still not even truly anonymizable because there's so few prosecution data points. I mean, looking at the UNODC type of data, you have 5 or 6 prosecutions in a given year, only 1 is male. Like, you're going to figure out, I mean, that's just, anonymity becomes so difficult. And that's where the MSC stuff, the multiple systems estimation throughout Europe project that I led, became so problematic, because when you only have such small numbers of cases, you can extrapolate, but anyone can find out. So, and I completely agree with what Mel's saying. I mean, that's why I almost never did research on people, like we talked about, as an active participant in like their unhealed trauma, because it's not often the case that you can be objective. So I don't really understand the point of it. Like, I think asking the service providers about their impression of the people they serve makes more sense, like from a science point of view.
About when you own the data, and I find this very disrespectful sometimes to survivors, as they were saying, you know, like using my information and you're actually, there is not an expiration date on that. A solution could be like, you can use that information, you know, for the project that you're working on. After that, you're not allowed to use that information. But the disrespectful part of it is that they take the information and they use it, take advantage of it, may make money of it. And as they were saying, $50, a gift card, it's ridiculous and disrespectful. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it is particularly a sensitive topic for survivors of commercial exploitation. Our value as humans has been literally directly associated with a dollar amount. And so when we receive that $50 gift card and then we see that you've shopped this project around and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, that parallel is very re-exploitative. And we see it and we feel it. I saw another hand. Tanya.
So, I feel like I could sing or something. So when I just, you know, we're talking about exactly that, and we've been talking about this forever, about the $50 gift card, and how some organizations have taken note and they do it. And then one of the things that Honorable Ronnie said, you know, just about like, and I've had organizations say this to me, how do they, you know, like in their filter, how, like what gives them the right to say a survivor has healed enough in their journey to be able to, you know, ask questions, like, you know, and I just, like, I want to answer to this. Is that okay? Right? Go for it. I mean, I don't have an answer. I'm just saying, you know, this is something that we've talked about and it's important. And when since we're talking about the buying and selling of humans, right? And this is our plight, right? Things that we have to heal through. It's a priority, and we just haven't made it a priority because a lot of us, I know for myself, definitely I've been exploited by organizations and probably still today at some point. I don't know who's doing stuff with my face and name and story, right? So what is there, like what's who, what, how, like what do we do about this is my question. Megan.
Answers, anybody? Where's Rob when we need a good answer?
I can't answer that for the field at large. I will just give a shout out to Tina Front because she has some really clear guidelines on hiring survivors that I think is really impressive and sustainable.
No, I'm saying More to Life, we do too.
Yeah, share. I think having the guidelines are empowering for survivors because they know what the expectations are. We do a disservice when expectations are not clarified. Mm-hmm. So when there's a reaction from behavior that was not clarified, then there's personal offense. And anyway, please share.
I was just gonna say at More to Life, people didn't know who we were for a long time, even though government officials did and some national leaders, because we never shared survivor stories, ever. We just didn't do it. There wasn't a press release, there wasn't a picture. We didn't use their stories to raise funds. I just was appalled by it. And I would be at big conferences and I would see survivors go in the bathroom and regurgitate and cry and go into panic attacks, you know, and if you have to have a therapist in the room, you know. So I think that in the medical field, there's a HIPAA compliance aspect when you go into a hospital. And so let's say that you are getting Medicare or you have insurance. That medical consortium cannot share your data or information without your permission. Whether you're paying for the services, you paid for the insurance, and paying for the services, you paid for the insurance through some other means. And so I think that data is associated with your mental health, with your life health, and the perpetuation of it deals with social anthropology and things that are really going to help change how we see the world. And data in today's world is extremely valuable. And so we have to find a way to protect it, just like in the medical field. HIPAA compliance has to go several clicks up.
Yeah, thank you. Tanya, what you just shared, the conversation, one of the conversations that we had with the Advisory Council for the Resilience Fund, so it's 6 survivor-led organizations and their representatives that advise the Resilience Fund. And going back to this risk model versus trust model, a lot of stakeholders were concerned, and this is a question that comes up. When we give somebody $500 unrestricted, we're not monitoring it, there's no requirements of what they have to do with it, any courses, how do we know that maybe it's not going back to their trafficker or they're not spending it on illicit substances? Like, those are some of some narratives that need to be changed there. But one of the individuals on the council gave me a gut punch when I just, you know, I brought these up of like, we need to work through this. They said, why is it that our proximity to our exploitation determines how trustworthy we are? My feelings the whole weekend after that convening, because it made me, like, I was thinking that too, like, as a survivor. So I needed to check that in myself and think about, there isn't a number of like, well, if you're 3 years exited, then you're trustworthy, or at 5 years, you're mentally stable. If that's the case, I shouldn't be here. Healing is a journey, and being human is lifelong. And those pieces, we're gonna be hot messes at various stages. But the ability to revoke consent, to have informed consent, are really important considerations, and they're fluid. So there's broad policies that may apply across the table. And then there's other ones that require just more nuance and individualized discussions. So thank you all for engaging this afternoon. My books are over on the table. Speaking of survivor-led projects, Survivor's Guide to Money was initially drafted by me back in 2017 and went out through several pilots with folks with lived experience to bring out the final product. It's now in its 3rd edition. And so would love to have you come check that out over at the table. And then you can also download that, the significance of context report with Polaris over there. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great session. So now we're actually going to have our coffee break. Now the coffee is available next door, and we'll reconvene here at 5 o'clock for our wrap up, and we'll move Dr. Brooks' session to tomorrow so that we can stay on schedule and get you guys to bed at an early hour tonight. Thanks, everyone.